So I talk a lot about coming back home to heart, but I'm realizing that maybe that's a little bit abstract for some. You know, there's on a practical level, you can just bring your awareness to your heart and recognize what are the sensations, what are the emotions. Like when you have emotions, what does it feel like in your heart? And you can simply bring your conscious awareness into that part of your body. But what I'm really talking about is more of an internal state of being or an internal process or journey. So I was thinking about, well, what is it that keeps us from being in our hearts? And normally it's fear. And what is fear? Fear is normally covering, or it's the symptom of pain. And what is pain? Where does pain come from? Pain comes from our deeper wounds. And then the final question would be like, well, where do our wounds come from? And it's of my belief that we all, to varying degrees, have a wound. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we had a traumatic childhood. Some, yes. There could be physical signs of what kind of trauma or abuse you went through when you were a child, but it can also be really, really subtle. And my opinion of why we all have, my view of why we all have a wound is because as children, we tend to take things very personal. And so we can make stories about ourselves that are actually false, but it's a way that we make sense of things when we feel hurt or when we feel confused, or, you know, if ever we feel abandoned or rejected, or that we're not lovable, or that we're not important enough. You know, a child's mind can make a whole story and then therefore create a whole set of beliefs that go with that story that we carry forever until we consciously, well, we firstly make them conscious and then we consciously shift and heal them. And that is really just going to the source, to the core of the wound, and giving ourselves what we need, what we needed that we didn't get in that moment. So, you know, it can be so subtle, but it can just be a moment or an experience or what somebody said or how they reacted, or it could be the family dynamic over time, that where we just create this, you know, I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy enough, or I'm not wanted, I'm not lovable. There's all of these different identities. And I think our wounding, in a way, like the way that I like to look at it, is it's what makes us human. It's what creates this arc of life where we have this beautiful innocence as children. And I really do believe that we come into this world and we are compassionate, loving beings. You look at a baby and it's just, you know, it's beautiful. Like there's such innocence and love in their eyes that you don't ever look at a baby and go, oh, you're an asshole. You're just an asshole. Like that takes time, you know, to build a kind of personality. But our personalities are often built on, you know, what I think a big part of it are, I don't want to say just our personality, but our coping mechanisms are shaped by what ways did we feel hurt? Because we are essentially vulnerable, tender, sensitive beings, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I think we live in a society that wants to tell us that we should be invincible and unemotional and tough. And I just think actually what is going to change this world is like we all got to just embrace our humanity, because it's not working this way. In my opinion, it's really not working. So let me get to the point. So the journey, the work is really going, okay, I'm going to filter through these things. All of them are an invitation to go deeper in and closer towards who you really are, who you've always been. It's just underneath the I should be this, or I shouldn't be that, or I believe I'm this, but you know, all of these false stories about ourselves, it's like underneath all of that, it's already there. And who we innately are is worthy, is good enough, is lovable enough. All of these things, we just have to return back to that part of ourselves and recognize and realize that, like, yeah, we're worthy. We're not what we do. Yes, sometimes our behavior needs working on, but who we innately are is always worthy. It's just that we've lived under a construct, a paradigm that will say, you're good, you're bad, I'm going to praise you, I'm going to punish you, depending on what you do. And so then you look for validation based on what you do and not who you are on a deeper level. So the way back to your heart and your way back to home is you've got to go through the uncomfortable stuff. what we might call the shadow. And that is basically just when your fear arises and anxiety, because they tend to be at the surface, they tend to act out every day, or most consistent, let's just put it that way. They're the things that trigger us. You sit with them. You stay with them. You do not see them as a problem. You see them simply as a messenger that is beckoning you to come closer towards yourself, to give yourself loving attention. So instead of berating yourself for what you're afraid of or what you're anxious about, you get curious, lovingly curious. And you go, okay, why am I scared? Where's that fear coming from? Where's that anxiety coming from? And then that brings us into the deeper layers. And most likely, if there's any kind of fear or anxiety and any kind of strong emotion that might come with that, sometimes there's anger, frustration. There's normally underneath that always sadness. I find it really hard to come across someone that doesn't have some kind of sadness under those elements. And then the sadness, like the more we go towards it, that's what brings us into our pain. And then when we get to our pain, we sit with our pain. And we don't have to go over the story, but we have to sit with it enough to just say, hey, like, what hurts you? Where did you feel this pain? You know, when was the first moment you felt this pain? Why did you feel this pain? And eventually you get to the core wound, and maybe even to the moment where you first felt that, or, you know, one of the more important moments where you first felt that. And from there you go to giving yourself the need. And from that point forward, it's like it literally changes the entire cycle, and it has this kind of domino effect that the pattern that you've been living in starts to kind of take a completely different turn, because all of a sudden what you're learning is how to show up for yourself, so that if you felt alone, you're no longer alone. If you felt abandoned, you're no longer abandoned, but it's because you are showing up for you. You are giving yourself what you needed and what you still need now. So this is ultimately the path back home to ourselves, because really at the end of it, I mean, if there's not really an end, but you know, the point that I'm trying to get to is that you accept your entire humanity. And in that acceptance, it doesn't mean you have to be perfect or positive or happy all the time, but you're comfortable with being with your pain, with your sadness, with your fears. You understand your triggers. You understand the language of your emotions. And through that, you get to know who you are, and you just become accepting of your entire humanity. And that's what brings you into a place of heart, because the heart can hold everything. What keeps us from being in our heart is our fear. And our fear is just a symptom of our pain, which is a symptom of our hurt, which is a symptom of our wounding. If we go to the wound and we give ourselves what we need and we ultimately heal that wound, everything else transforms. And then we can come to a place of love in our hearts and feeling that love for ourselves, for other people. And it's a hugely transformational experience. It takes time. It's simple, not easy, but it's simple. But it takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes the willingness and the courage, like the courage to go in. I think one thing that's really important is people think that they don't have to be afraid, or that they shouldn't be afraid. There's the should and shouldn't. I shouldn't be afraid. Courage is in the face of fear, and you take your fear by the hand and you move through it. You know, you take it with you, because the only thing fear is afraid of is fear itself, right? It's just scared. It's a scared, vulnerable part of who, you know, of ourselves. It's the little child within us, right? That was hurt and lonely and misunderstood and confused and couldn't make sense of anything. And ultimately, all that this part needs is just our loving attention, our presence, to be able to trust that we're going to show up and we're not going to continue to abandon and reject and put down and criticize and, you know, all of these things that we do, whether we're conscious of it or not. So that is a long-winded response to how you return home to your heart. So if you're interested, keep on following, or you can always sign up for a session, but really this is just to offer you some food for thought. Take it or leave it as feels right for you, and loving you from afar.